Love, exciting and new.
Hello, Hannah Waddingham here. Have you seen the fabulous new Sun Princess? World-class entertainment, exceptional dining, and the greatest pizza ever.
It's a love.
Don't miss our Come Aboard sale with up to 40% off and free room upgrades. Visit princess.com or call your travel advisor to book. Princess Cruises. Terms and restrictions apply. Offer ends 2/28/25. Ships are Bermudan and British Registry.
This episode is brought to you by Abercrombie. There's nothing better than the perfect jean and going out top combo, or an outfit that perfectly matches your plans. Abercrombie's relaxed jean goes with every occasion. Date nights with something lace, or daytime with a cozy sweater. And their barrel jean will surprise you. It's the trend that will become a staple in your wardrobe. Abercrombie denim comes in tons of rises, fits, and washes. Find your perfect pair online or in store.
Welcome to Supernatural Circumstances, the podcast where we take you down the rabbit hole into the fantastic world of the strange, the paranormal, and the unknown. I'm Morgan Knudsen.
And I'm Mike Browne. It's time to dim the lights and settle in. Come along with us on this week's adventure. And boy, what an adventure. We actually went on a physical adventure together.
It was a real one.
Yeah, with this particular guest, Jason Hewlett.
And what a fun week that was. Last June, I think it was June, or was it a little bit earlier than that?
I think it was earlier. I think it was May.
It could have been May. Yeah. Anyway, last year, we had the privilege of having Jason Hewlett, who is a paranormal researcher and author, come from BC, along with you, Mike,
Yep.
to my home province of Alberta. And for those who don't know too much about Alberta, Alberta is steeped in paranormal lore and is a hotspot for all sorts of phenomenon, everything from dogman, Sasquatch, UFOs, hauntings, all sorts of things. And one of the deepest legends, perhaps, is the Wendigo, which is something that is taken extremely seriously here. And I've become a student of the knowledge and information through, well, people like Alisia, who we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, a Wendigo is a really interesting, even just concept. It's often associated with winter and depicted as a fearsome beast that consumes humans, or a spirit that possesses humans, leading them to cannibalism. And so it's a really kind of a fascinating world to dive into. And there is a case of a very famous case of Wendigo here in Alberta. Is there not, Morgan?
There is, and that was the story of Swift Runner, which many people are familiar with, but it was a Cree trapper who came to St. Albert claiming that his family had passed away due to the cold, and it didn't turn out that way. When the police looked into it, they discovered that the family had actually been murdered, that he had killed all his children and his wife and had eaten them. And it was extremely gruesome, but it also led to a bit of legal history in Alberta, which was the first legal hanging here in Alberta as well. And for this journey and this experience, we had on a very dear friend of mine who came along with us, Alisia Perrault-Werner, and she is the descendant. She's Metis, and she was the descendant of her great-grandfather, who was involved with the RCMP, or I guess the Northwest Mounted Police and whatnot at the time that Swift Runner was actually arrested. So her family goes way back into St. Albert's history, and it was just absolutely fantastic to have that perspective along with us throughout the entire journey. I learned a lot.
Yeah. So let's get into this conversation with Jason, because we've got a lot of ground to cover.
We sure do. Let's do this.
Lowe's knows that free is just better. That's why MyLowe's Rewards is free to join. As a member, you earn points towards MyLowe's money on eligible purchases, get exclusive free gifts, and earn free shipping at Silver Key status, all on top of weekly member-only deals. Don't wait. Join MyLowe's Rewards for free today and start saving more. Lowe's, we help, you save. Loyalty program subject to terms and conditions. Details at lowes.com/terms. Subject to change.
Building a portfolio with Fidelity Basket Portfolios is kind of like making a sandwich. It's as simple as picking your stocks and ETFs, sort of like your meats and other toppings, and managing it as one big, juicy investment. Now that's pretty good. Learn more at fidelity.com/baskets. Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC. Member NYSE SIPC.
Well, welcome, Jason, to the show. This is so good to have you back again. And we had you back a week or two ago, but after all the adventures that we've been on, I felt like it was appropriate to have you back again to talk about some of them. So I'm so glad you could make it, and welcome to Supernatural Circumstances.
Well, thanks so much, guys, for having me back. It's been like, what, 3 times in the last year?
It feels like. Yeah. Plus,
We're a
you had
little
to hang out with us. Plus, you had to hang out with us for a weekend. So,
and isn't that was like it's January, so we're coming up on a year in May with that too, aren't we, man? Like, holy cow! Like, time
what
flies.
The heck? Yeah, time has flown, and in the meantime, we have had some interesting, crazy weather on both fronts. For the Americans, we've had this sort of El Nino thing going through where there's been crazy fluctuations in temperature in BC and the prairies, where it's been freezing cold and it warms up and freezing cold, which kind of got me thinking a little bit about some of the things that we explored around the legends and whatnot of the Wendigo, because specifically here in Alberta, it's a big part of our history. It's a big part of the history of Canada and the States. And Jason, you've got some pretty cool things coming up in and around that. What can you share that initially drew you into the research of this lore, of these events? Like, what was it for you?
It was like, I've always been interested in the Wendigo. Since I was a kid, there was an Incredible Hulk comic where the Hulk fought the Wendigo.
oh,
Yeah, and I can't remember the exact issue off the top of my head, but in this version, the Wendigo looked like a Yeti more than anything else. It was like a white, hairy beast thing in the woods, but they did sort of touch on like the cannibalism. It's a kid's comic, so a little bit on the cannibalism and that, it takes you over if you eat human flesh kind of thing. And I thought it was a comic book character at first. So that was my first introduction. I even remember drawing like comics of the Wendigo fighting various Marvel characters because, I was quite young and I was always into that. So that was my introduction. But as time went on, I started to realize there was a lot more to the story. And at that point, it wasn't even stuff like with Swift Runner, or the Algernon Blackwood book or anything like that. But it was popping up more and more in kind of my research as I was researching more of the paranormal. And I started to realize that it was indeed, a very real thing that people believed they were seeing in the woods, not unlike a Sasquatch, but that it looked very different than a Sasquatch. And of course, this would be more, and Morgan, I know you can attest to this, and Mike too, that there's a pop culture version of what it's supposed to look like, and then there's sort of the historical version of what it is. And of course, the pop culture one is like, the antlers, and kind of like a deer head and big emaciated body and things like that. So that's really where it started. And so last year, probably like sort of February, March, I'd finished up my Ogopogo book and Cursed Waters and Legend of the Ogopogo were scheduled to come out that summer. And I was just kind of looking for something to do. So I started researching the Cadborosaurus, which is off the coast of, British Columbia. It's a sea monster, and the Wendigo. And I ended up talking, it was one of the many meetings I had with Eli Watson, who directed Cursed Waters, and I worked on that film with him. And he's like, so what book are you writing about next? And I just went like, the Wendigo. I just picked it out of the two at that point, and it basically just kind of started from there. It's
so interesting because you're talking about this sort of influence with pop culture. And I can honestly say that that was my first introduction as well, not through comic books, but through the old series that came out back in I think it was in the 90s, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. And one of the stories in there was about, and it was kind of like, it played a little bit on the Algernon Blackwood Wendigo story of somebody being in the woods and being lifted up, and he would say, "My feet, my fiery feet." And the I guess the anchor behind that was that one of the symptoms of becoming Wendigo is that your hands and feet develop this rash, and they burn like crazy. And that was one of the thing. Of course, I didn't know that at the time, and I really didn't take the story at the time seriously, because here it is in this cultural, fun sort of horror story book. But I didn't realize at the time that I was actually sitting in the middle of almost all of the best known real life Wendigo cases in the world. I had no clue about any of this.
Same. When I was reading the whole comic, I had no idea it was the story really came out of northern Alberta. Like it was like the next province over. Like
totally. Mike, what was your introduction to this?
Honestly, my introduction was when I started researching for Dark Poutine and wanted an interesting story, and stumbled across the Swift Runner story. Growing up in Nova Scotia, you don't hear about Wendigo as much.
No, I guess not, right? Even though there is Wendigo sightings, I think purportedly out like in the east, right?
Yeah.
But I guess probably not exactly there.
No.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating thing, and I don't think people realize just how serious that it actually is, especially here in Alberta and whatnot. Is that it is taken extremely seriously. The Swift Runner case, like you were mentioning, Jason, for everybody that's listening, if anybody wants to go and look that up, it's actually resulted in the first legal hanging in Alberta. This is court record. And it was a Cree trapper who had basically isolated his family and killed them, including his children, and ate them. And he ended up being transferred to the Fort Saskatchewan prison at the time and hung. And it's probably, I would think, one of the most known cases of the Wendigo. But Jason, when you were here, we went all over the place. We went on quite the tour of Alberta. And I mean, when I say tour, it's a tour, people. It is very long drives everywhere here. Okay. It is very long drives. There is nothing that is half an hour away. Everything is like, you're looking at 3 to 5 hours, and whatnot. But what stood out for you, Jason? Were there any other stories that you didn't know about? Like, what was it like for you?
It was, it was really interesting because it really, and I know like Chad Lewis has said this too, because he obviously kind of wrote like the book on the Wendigo in modern times. And he had been out here with his writing partner, kind of did the same things that we did. And he and I were talking after the fact, and it's right. Like it really just brought home, like you kind of, whenever you get into some of these stories, you wonder how people can believe that something like this could be real. Lake monsters for me were like that until I actually went and spent time on literally Lake Okanagan. And it was the same with the Wendigo. Like, how could people think this possible? And once you start getting on the ground and going to like the Twatna Valley, you really get a feeling for how, and we were there in May. So it was a much more hospitable time than the winter. But even then you got a feeling for like the isolation. And for how, especially going back like 100 years, it would be, there had been like even less population. It'd be even harder to get to these places. So you could believe that people would believe that this creature was possible, and that it would be that someone could resort to such horrible things as eating, in the Swift Runner's case, like his entire family, right? Yeah. And just that people would go mad with or without a monster in these environments and starve to death. Like it really brought home how I think the story could get started, and then how it could even flourish into modern times like today. Because there's people, like you say, Morgan, that still really believe this to be true and that this creature is real.
Yeah, and especially here, like you were saying, it is so open and so vast. And we weren't even in, I would say, the most remote places here. You keep going north here in Alberta, and I mean, you need a gun out there because there are no grocery stores. You're not going to be able to go get meat anywhere else other than hunting. Those places here still exist. And so I think that's one of the things that not only, like you were saying, allow these stories to continue, but also give a lot of weight to them. And one of the things that we talked about when you were here was, many people immediately label this as a mental illness, that this is, Wendigo psychosis is what they've kind of labeled this, that this is somehow the result of starvation and things like that. But we know that there are cases that this diagnosis just doesn't fit the mold. We've got, say, for example, Swift Runner, who was not starving. He was not out. There was a full, full prairies that year. When he showed up at the door of the St. Albert mission after he reported, killed his family, the man was like 200 plus pounds. So it's huge. Like, he's a big dude, 6'5".
Even in the picture at Fort Saskatchewan of him, he's not an emaciated human being.
No.
No, and I think so that's something I want to touch on a little bit is, what did you come away with after being here, after writing this book? What did you think about that diagnosis and where it fits in this whole story?
I think, I get why people go that route, right? With it being like a mental health condition, because it just, in its own way, it does make sense when you kind of look at the what's reported, right? Like, I won't say the evidence, but with what's reported. And it fits in, all the behavior fits into kind of a psychosis for sure. And people who generally suffer from this psychosis are Indigenous people. It's almost never reported in Caucasians or Europeans or anything like that. So I get it. And it is a nice, neat way to explain a really terrible thing that goes on. But culturally, within the Algonquin and the Cree, it doesn't make sense because they take it far more seriously than a mental. You have people who aren't suffering from it willing to kill the perpetrators of these crimes in ways that just don't make sense. You know what I mean? In terms of the chopping up of the body, the pouring of hot liquid on the heart because they believe it's frozen and they need to thaw it out in order to kill this. You've got case with Jack Fiddler. Jack Fiddler, yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. Going and killing people who he believes are Wendigo, and not just him, but all people in the tribe. And they saw this as a means of preventing a real catastrophe from happening. So in that sense, it goes beyond a simple mental illness to me. Are people being possessed by something? I'm not sure yet. I haven't drawn a conclusion that way yet because I'm not quite done the book and I haven't compiled my final thoughts. But people, the people involved in all these cases believed it to be true. And if that many people believe something, then there is something legitimately to it that goes beyond just a simple folk tale or cautionary tale.
What always caught me about that explanation was that some of these people, especially some of the cases just here in Alberta, there was a case of, I think it was two sisters who were supposedly being belabored by this entity, and they were picked up and taken to a village and given, I believe it was a concoction of hot tallow and a number of other things that were supposed to heal this. And it did. There were people that were so-called basically cured of this, which that doesn't fit with a mental illness. If you're mentally ill, drinking something is not going to fix it.
No.
Especially if you're in psychosis. It's just not going to fix it. And in these cases, it's reported that it did, which is really interesting from that standpoint to me. I think that's it. Yeah, it's very, very interesting where, I mean, if we've got some sort of cultural issue or something like that going on, that just doesn't seem to fit the bill. Something, I don't know. Mike, what do you think about that?
Oh God. It's such a big topic when it comes to this because there's so many opinions on it, and I'm not ready to give one. I'm not writing a book on on Wendigo. I'm still new to this whole thing, and I don't fall one way or the other. I did sort of dig into Jack Fiddler and did an episode on that particular case, and I find it really fascinating, like you said, Morgan. If people are being given something that a medicine man says is going to cure this particular thing, how is it a mental illness? It's not psychological. There's something physical going on, or maybe something spiritual that we're not aware of culturally. I think for us to tackle this, we need to be really careful, because there's a lot of stuff out there about indigenous culture and all that kind of stuff. There's always the trope of the haunted house on the Indian burial ground kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so when we are sharing stories like this, we need to be really careful that we do it from a place of respect and that kind of perspective,
Agreed,
Absolutely.
100%.
And Jason, that brings me actually to one of the things that we did when you were here, which was talk to a dear friend of mine, Alisia, and her daughter, who are Metis, and she's actually just been elected to the board of one of her local chapters here, which is pretty cool. She's the president now, and which is pretty neat, and just full of information about all of this subject. She was so helpful. She's just one of the sweetest people I know. What did you take away from meeting Alisia and hearing her stories as a Indigenous person?
Well, I thought having her, available to talk and share those stories was great, because it brought that perspective. Like, as someone who is like, about as white as you can get,
right?
Tackling, I get sometimes uncomfortable tackling these stories, because I don't, like Mike says, I don't have that cultural background. So to meet someone who does and who can bring those stories forward is fantastic. And like, she was along for part of our whole recreation of the trip that Swift Runner took, basically. When he showed up at St. Albert and then was basically taken from St. Albert to Fort Saskatchewan, where he was eventually hung. So to have her there and sort of be able to fill in some background information on Father Lacombe, and the fact that like her ancestors lived in St. Albert, I think her great grandfather would have been there
Yes.
when Swift Runner was there. And just he who had volunteered with the police, the Northwest Mounted Police, like that's just brought the story to life in a whole new way.
Right.
Which I really, really appreciate, like between your knowledge, Morgan, and hers, it really helped me understand the story a lot more than if I just sat and read books and, tried to compile that information into something.
It's always, I think, so important that we take, as people of a different culture, really listen to the cultures that we are exposed to, especially when it comes to things like this, because we have this nasty tendency, I think, just kind of being Westerners or Europeans, to think, oh, no, that was just a fairy story to make sure the kids didn't go out at night, or this was something. But that's just simply not true. And I know this has been one of my greatest learning curves over the years, was where, I started, like you guys, I was reading it out of this Scary Stories book, and I became really, really aware that there's something bigger going on here. And I think in order to understand that spiritual side of it, you have to be able to go to the source. You have to be able to talk to the people who were there that maybe witnessed some of this. And there are current day witnesses that report, I've seen one of these, or, this isn't something just out of the 1900s. This is something that's happening now, and that people do report these things. Jason, have you run across any more modern day encounters than maybe what we talked about here in Alberta?
Yeah, I have actually. I interviewed an investigator out of Vancouver named Amanda Quill with Cold Spotters, and she shared with me an investigation they did that was around Wendigo sightings. It's in Surrey, the Green Timbers area.
Yep.
Okay.
In Surrey. And I think it's funny though, the people around there call it the rake of Green Timbers. But they believe, for some reason, they also think it's a Wendigo. And it was just basically something seen lurking about and, peering in people's windows with again, the antlers, etc. And people there believe it's tied into the fact just of, past crimes that have occurred and drug overdoses and things like that. It's that whole concept of bad things in the land bringing forth this being. And then there is one 30 minutes from where I live, actually, that I looked into last summer. People that were acquaintances, they live in an area called Pinatan Lake, where there's been stories for as long as I can remember about Bigfoot sightings and UFO sightings and other high strangeness up there. And they'd had these experiences going on in their home, this sort of paranormal activity. And then one night, while the wife was driving home, she saw standing on the side of the road this big, dark, silhouetted shape. Again, that looked like, they described it as like an upright moose. These antlers wearing this cloak, which kind of made me think a little bit about what you guys sort of saw at Mameo Beach, less, the tunnel of light idea. And what was interesting is that the wife's brother had been struggling with addiction and he'd kind of overcome it. And then after she saw that, he relapsed and then died within 2 weeks.
That's awful.
Which is awful. But again, it ties into that sort of tragedy, a consumptive spirit, draining people. And so my colleague Pete and I went up and kind of did our own little investigation. We didn't find anything substantial, but it was just interesting that, like you say, this is where I wanted to bring something up. So we know that, like, at first the Wendigo was like something that sort of possessed people,
right,
and made them eat people. And then when Algernon Blackwood wrote a book, he gave it like this physical form,
right,
that eventually became adopted into pop culture in movies like Antlers. So are people today seeing like a Wendigo, or are they seeing something that, because of the pop culture version of it, they're interpreting it as a Wendigo? The actual Wendigo doesn't have the antlers.
Yeah.
Right? And it looks almost more like a rake, a white, pale, thin, long, spindly limbs, that kind of thing. So that's one thing that, getting towards the end of the book and sort of talking about these modern sightings, I find really intriguing is what are we interpreting other things as a potential Wendigo, or has the Wendigo changed with time? You know what I mean? Like, it's got me really asking a lot of questions. Or are we, because of what our mind is about what a Wendigo could be, are we almost like creating these things that we see?
The reason I giggled a little bit is because we've had this kind of discussion on supernatural circumstances a number of times.
Well, I think it's something that's coming up now more and more, right? Especially in the paranormal field, and especially as the paranormal becomes popular, like we talked about a few weeks ago on television, are people almost like creating these experiences? Is it
a thought form, or is it because this is in the popular culture, this is what people are seeing? It's like flying saucers, that whole idea of flying saucers. We've had guests on where we were talking about that kind of thing and what people saw before there was such a thing as flying saucers in the popular culture. It was something different that they would see. Like, for example, in the Bible, I don't want to go back too far, but Ezekiel saw a wheel a-rolling, like that kind of stuff.
Chariots of the gods.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
Yeah, I think that hits on so much, like what Mike just said, where when you've got that type of focus into any sort of a subject matter, especially something like this, that maybe a thought form that may have started out one way has the capacity to be added to as we go along. If people's perceptions change, well, maybe we're adding to the look of something as we go. I know in Chad's book originally, he has a photo in there, which I always thought was very, very interesting. And it was of a traditional dance that was, I believe it was reported to ward off the Wendigo. And interestingly enough, the indigenous dancers were all wearing antlers. And this is a very old photograph. Like, this is when, back when I think the West was starting to get a little bit more interested in what was going on. But I always thought that was very interesting, because here it was probably one of the first references to the antlers. that far back. And yet it's been, you go to these different places within the US, within Canada. And from what my friend Matt and I, when we were writing one of my segments in Teaching the Living about this, is that we noticed that depending on where you went, changed the description of what this looked like. So where you had some that would report the antlers, you'd also have some, like you were saying, Jason, that were reporting this kind of almost alien-looking, bald-headed, emaciated thing. And then there was a place here in Alberta with somebody that we spoke to who actually saw it as something small and short. And so Chad, I believe it was in his book, and when we had him on this show a couple of years ago about this subject, he was wondering if it almost had to do with a life cycle of something like this, that as it was growing and progressing and changing, and maybe that has to do with how we're perceiving it or whatever, but somehow that was actually altered, like the being itself was being altered by something, a course of time or something like that.
So the popular saying used to be, I'll believe it when I see it. But now it seems to be we're sort of hitting on I'll see it when I believe it. You know? Like this is kind of the way that we're going. Like if I believe I'm going to see a flying saucer, if I believe I'm going to see an antlered thing wearing a cloak, then that's what I'm going to see because my consciousness or my psychology is ready for that particular thing.
Exactly. And I think as the paranormal has become more popular, more people are open to believing in it, so therefore people are seeing more. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah, I think that's huge because I know, there was a time period, I think, where some of these sightings historically, or at least the ones that were reported, seem to have died off a little bit. Like there was a time period where you weren't hearing so much about sightings of it, but it's cropped back up again. And I wonder if it's because of what you were talking about, Jason, where there's been like a resurgence in pop culture and is making people, when they are out there, maybe a little bit more receptive to stuff that's out there, stuff that's going on. How much of these do you think are people mislabeling something? Do you think there's some of that going on, or are people just trying their best to figure out what they're seeing?
I think because it's not as widely seen as, say, what people do with Bigfoot, you know what I mean? Yeah. Or things like that. So I think it's people making sense of what they saw more than anything else, because they aren't seeing, like, you're not hearing Wendigo reports coming in daily or weekly or even monthly. So when people say they see them, like it's more spread apart. So I think it gives these sightings a little more credibility. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. In a way, because it isn't as widespread. But again, are they interpreting? Yes. Are they seeing it? Are they saying it's a Wendigo just because that's what they think it looks like?
Right.
Given by what's being seen out there, if that makes any sense. But
no, I think it does. And I think Alberta is kind of a sort of a unique hub for this subject matter, and I think some of that has to do with the terrain. Some of it has to do with the weather. For the Americans that are listening, our terrain is sort of half and half. It's a lot of prairie and farming, and a lot of mountains and forests, and a lot of rugged terrain as well. We're kind of a mix of a bunch of different things. You can kind of travel all over Alberta and hit whatever terrain or jungle you really are aiming for, and so it really gives kind of a mystery and I don't know how to explain it other than sort of a vastness as you're driving through. It makes me think of just how many things that are really out there that we are not seeing or understanding, and like how easy it is to dismiss some of these stories. Like I'll talk a little bit about our journey to Eating Creek. Many of the places in Alberta are either named after a witness of a Wendigo encounter, like Lacombe, Leduc, some of these locations all over Slave Lake and whatnot. And then there's this Eating Creek, and Eating Creek was named Eating Creek because apparently years ago it was home to a Wendigo. It was actually, this thing lived there, and it was known to have lived there, and it got its name after that. How did you feel, Jason, like going through the province and realizing that like most of these places are named after or about something like this? I mean, it's pretty crazy.
It is. It's almost unbelievable, but but yet there it is. you know, and I think it shows how seriously people take that story, and the Wendigo, and how many people still believe in it. Because like you'd pointed out, Morgan, that like people to this day don't like talking about it. They're afraid if you even mention it that it's going to show up, you know, and come after you. And that's like people in modern capitalist society where science has a lot of weight are still believing in this. And I'm not saying that to be critical. I'm saying that speaks to, I think, how powerful and how integrated this is into Alberta.
Yeah.
And I think that's something, again, that you got to respect. And I mean, I could, you know, there's that experience we had at Mameo Beach where we found the burial ground near where you guys had the sighting, but you didn't know it was even there. And we're investigating, and then someone drives up in a black truck and basically scares us off. Like I'd hate to think if we hadn't have left and tried arguing what could happen. So that's how seriously people sort of take this, not even just the Wendigo belief, but like just the spiritual beliefs in that area in general.
Yeah, it's so rooted in like the culture here, and that's one of the things that really, to me, brings so much credence to this. Is the fact that, I mean, like you were saying, we live in a society where we can look at things scientifically and objectively, and we like to do that, especially as investigators. That's kind of our go-to. We want to see the evidence, and we want to. And what I found really interesting was that when we had Chad Lewis on and whatnot, many of our listeners will know that name. When he did his deep dive into the subject matter, you know, here's a guy who's got his master's in psychology. And he walked away absolutely believing something is going on here. And for Chad, that's a big one, because Chad is very much an expert in folklore. He understands the psychology behind it, how these stories get going and things like that. And Chad walked away going, this is not just a story. This is something is going on here that I can't explain. And I mean, I think there was a number of factors that helped him with that. One of the stories that he had told was when he was out, I can't remember which lake he was camping at, but it was one of the Wisconsin lakes, could have been Lake Wendigo. But he was out with his colleagues, Kevin, and I think it was Noah Voss, and they were, he and Noah were out by the lake, and as they were coming back to camp, Kevin was, you know, preparing the fire and things like that. They looked up and they saw an owl staring at them, and they thought, okay, that's a little coincidental, because often owls are considered the watchers of the Wendigo and things like that. So they thought, oh, that's kind of neat. Anyway, they get back to camp, and Kevin is visibly shaken and said, there's something in the woods. And Chad was like, what do you mean? And he said, there's something in the woods. I can hear voices coming from different parts of the woods. And he couldn't make out what they were saying. There was nobody out there. But there's this sort of mimicking kind of voice that started coming out of the woods. And so I think these incidents really spurred him on to wonder exactly what's going on here. What did you walk away with, Jason, with this? What was your take on it? Do you think there was something going on?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. You know, you can't sort of research and like a story like Swift Runners or like the Jack Fiddler story, and take into account like how strongly people believe in it and just brush it off as fallacy. Yeah. You know, you can't. There is something to this phenomenon. I think it's a very, like Morgan, you know this too. Like, there's a lot of different aspects to the paranormal. Most of it is really quite benign. You know what I mean? People more getting scared of something that they just don't understand. But there's something to this, and it's. I'm not gonna use demonic, but it's dark.
Yeah.
Whatever this is, it's not a friendly phenomenon, right? I mean, it ends in murder. Like, my book's becoming as much a true crime book as it is a paranormal book.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like you could almost chalk it up to like some kind of, evil force influencing people to do really bad things. And I think it's something like you got to be careful when looking into it. Like writing the book and recounting some of the experiences that we had and the stories we heard. There's a lot of times looking back that I felt a sense of unease in places.
Interesting. Can you give an example?
The whole Momeo Beach experience.
Yeah.
Even before the truck and stuff like that. But even just like hearing the story and then being out there, and then just finding the mound, like, and then just stuff that had the sensations like, that you felt, Mike, at parts of this burial ground.
I felt physically sick.
Yeah.
I couldn't continue. I had to go sit in the truck.
That's right. And other people felt it too. And Morgan, you broke out the EMF meter. There was nothing there that could have caused naturally these feelings.
No.
And then there's the secondary part of that burial ground that looked like it had kind of been destroyed. Remember? And the crosses were toppled over. Like there's just something off about the story that makes it more than just a story. That's the only way I can come to it. I still can't tell you exactly what it like. Is there this creature wandering in the woods eating people that used to be human?
Right.
And I can't draw that conclusion yet because I haven't, I just haven't put that much into it. But something is out there that's impacting people and has driven them to do horrible things. And it is more than just a mental health condition. Okay. Like that's kind of where I'm at with it right now. Is it a forest spirit possessing people? It could be. Enough people believe in it. And there's been enough evidence, like you said, with drinking something to make it go away, where you can't discount it. And I've experienced so many different paranormal things in my time that I can't just dismiss something that I haven't experienced it myself, but I've been adjacent to it, and it impacted me. It left me feeling certain things that I can't deny.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of the angle that I come at this from, which is of course the parapsychology side of it, and what I've come to understand about consciousness just as a whole, and what we are capable of. We mentioned a million times on here the Philip experiment, where, and I'm sure our audience out there is probably sick of hearing about this, but I bring it up again. This idea that you can sit down and create a consciousness that is thinking, that is outside of you, simply by pure focus, which was tested multiple times throughout the Philip experiment in Toronto, and proven again and again and again. And I think the more that you sort of look at this in terms of what we understand from the parapsychological side of things, to me, the more possible that this becomes, and the less fantastic that, if people want to be skeptical about it and push it aside, when you begin to really understand, I think, this level of how our world works and our involvement within it, it's not even necessarily so much about what's out there, but what we're creating almost internally, if that makes any sense. Totally. Jason, I don't know if you want to comment on that a little bit, but that's kind of how I perceive and come at this.
That's exactly how I come at it as well. I think, whatever these forces are, like they're interacting with us, but we're interacting with it. And I think we influence the experiences that we have to some degree. Like, that's why when we do an investigation into, like, say, an alleged haunting, we go in skeptical, and then if something happens, we break that apart and try to explain it away. And if we can't explain it away, then we say, okay, it's possibly paranormal. But then if something happens 10 minutes later, we just don't say, oh, obviously it's just part of this haunted house. We break each little component down, each little bit of activity, and investigate it separately. And I think you have to do that with these stories as well. But the realization is that there is something out there that is a part of this world that we don't yet understand. But it's been here longer than we have, I think. And I think there's just different aspects to it. What I think is where it kind of gets carried away. Like, I remember I was doing an investigation and with this theater in a community near us, and someone starts talking about how there's a cabin nearby that's, possessed by the Wendigo. And at that point, I'm like, I don't think you understand what you're talking about.
Right.
That's not how it works. Like, Wendigos don't possess places.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, but people start throwing that around. They take a word that's popular, like a Wendigo or something, and just start tossing it around like it's just, it's like the skinwalker phrase and things like that, right? Like they just kind of, they don't quite know what they're talking about. But I think then people start talking about it, and then it influences other people's thoughts about it who aren't as knowledgeable. I don't know.
And then it's a YouTube video.
And then it's a YouTube video, and then, you know what I mean? Like, then it sort of spirals out of control. But I think that definitely, there's just, the Wendigo is something so complicated to try to discuss simply, especially on very little sleep. But it's
oh, poor Jason.
I'm just because I've been working on this book like for almost a year, and I was just working on it today, and like I'm getting towards the end where I kind of have to kind of surmise what I think.
Yeah,
and I'm struggling with it because I don't know if I believe in it in the sense of it being this flesh and blood creature that, like a Sasquatch, that walks in tribes and migrates, and moves from place to place. But it's also not a story. Yeah. Right? It's not a cautionary tale or a folk story, even though there's components of it that are like that. It is very real. It's like it's just this nebulous thing that I think, because it's not part of our culture, we've really tried to make it into something it's not, but it's also, it's just something that you don't mess with at the same time.
Well, and maybe that's a huge part of this. And I think a huge part of the discussion is that, it's not our job to label it.
No.
And, it's not, because it's, number one, it's not our culture, but also number two, I'm not sure we've got the means to do it. I think a lot of this phenomenon that we've talked about for years around the show, I always feel like I'm kind of floundering around hoping that something is going to like completely come together and you're going to have an answer to something that's concrete that you can write down. And that's just, I don't know if that's possible for people in a physical state. It's so big. And we're seeing such a minuscule piece of the world that we're in. All we can kind of do is just do the best we can with what we have that's in front of us and try to sort out as best we can as the evidence comes down the pipe. I'll tell you guys a brief story. It was a friend of mine told me a couple of years ago, and this was in Edson, Alberta. And she's a hunter and a trapper, and she had gone out with a group of friends to go hunting, and it was this off trail, and quite deep into the wooded area up there. Edson is kind of in the mountains. You're starting to get into the mountains when you're starting to get into Edson and Hinton and things like that. So they're going through this area that had fresh snow. Nobody'd walked in, like kind of remote. And they stopped because they were hearing, and she described it as what sounded like an elk, but she said the elk sounded mechanical. And she said she couldn't figure out what this noise was. She said it was so odd. Like, she said it wasn't really quite organic. Like, it had this very strange quality to it. And all the other people that were with her stopped, and I think everybody's hair stood on end. And they went a little bit further, and the calls started to change. And the next time that they heard it, it was a female. It was a woman that was saying, "Help me. Help me," with the same strange, off-sounding, like almost mechanical. Mechanical is not quite the right word, but just not right. Like, it sounded not right. And she said as soon as she heard that, and she said it was coming from this sort of stand of dense trees that were not far from them. And she said she knew instantly that this thing, whatever it was trying to lure them into these trees. And I mean, and she's a hunter. She's what she's out there all the time. She does this. And she said her friends at this point were freaking out, and she said, "Okay, everybody's got to, let's just calm down, just turn around, and we're going to walk back to the truck. Don't run, just walk back to the truck and whatnot." And she said they all got in the truck. They drove home, which is like a number of hours, and nobody said a damn thing for the entire time they were in their truck. And so it was about a year later that she actually told me about it. And she said, "I don't know what the hell this was," but the first thing that came to mind for her was, I wonder if this was some sort of Wendigo. It was mimicking, trying to pull them into the woods. But just like, I'm getting goosebumps just repeating her story. I mean, and Anyway, Jason, I'll let you comment, but it was so interesting.
Well, and see that, and that's just it, because weird stuff does happen in the woods like that that you can't explain. And when you hear, like, when you look at the Wendigo story, there's accounts of it mimicking people. We have that in BC. We call it tricksters, right? And they will do the exact same thing to lure you out into the woods away from your friends. So maybe we're just different places give it the same phenomenon, different words, right? Different names. Sorry, maybe, but I mean, I've had stuff happen in the woods that I can't explain, and it freaked the crap out of me. And so it makes sense that you could encounter that. I remember being up at a place called Heffley Lake out for a hike on this trail, and it sounded like something dropped out of a tree way on the trail in front of me. So whatever, things drop out of trees all the time. But then it just started happening more frequently, and it was like something getting closer, like repeatedly dropping and coming towards me. And it was the same thing. I'm just like, just turn around and walk back to the cabin. So I just turn around and walk back to the cabin. The whole time in my head, a voice is going, don't turn around, don't turn around, don't turn around. As I could hear this stuff falling behind me. And I mean, what's that? And why is my brain telling me that, right?
That sounds really similar to the story that Greg Bakken told us on a recent episode, Morgan.
Yes.
Remember? Yeah. It's very, very similar. And it's interesting how people have these really... they have the same experience. They describe it differently, but all these people that we talk to seem to have very, very similar experiences when they're out looking for these kind of things, which is it just blows my mind. Like, I've only ever gone into the woods hiking. I've never gone with the intent to go looking for anything specific. And now I want to. Like, I mean, I live close by. I live close to Green Timbers. It's like a 15-minute drive for me. So now I want to go there. I love it there, and I've never had a weird experience there. Although you do have a strange feeling when you're in there. I mean, it's in the middle of a city, but at the same time, it feels very remote, which is really, really strange.
And that's a unique thing, right? Like not a lot of cities have areas quite like. Although there's that place in Edmonton that we went to on that hike.
We got a huge river valley here in Edmonton. We've got the most green space of all the provinces, and apparently, and so there's a lot of places here in Edmonton. Like, we've got a lot of mines. We've got a lot of old like gopher mines here. We've got caves. Like, there's a lot. Like, most of Edmonton underneath of it is hollow, which is really interesting because we've had so many gopher mines and whatnot dug over the years. They used to mine coal and brick and all sorts of things. And we've got so much green space with our river valley. It's just so expansive. And people have reported stuff all the way down there. I spent about 7 years or so with a colleague of mine, Matt, investigating an area of town called Riverdale. And it's part of that river valley expanse. There's really old homes down there, beautiful place. And we had some absolutely incredible experiences down there. And there's things that I still to this day cannot explain. I've got photographs from down there that I cannot explain. And I really think that whole cautionary tale about, stay out of the woods. I don't think our fear of the woods is necessarily entirely psychological as what people think it is. They like to say, oh, no, it's just our fear of the unknown. I don't think it is. I think it's our instinct saying that there's something going on, that there's something in there we need to be aware of. What do you guys think about that?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. I've spent a good chunk of my life in the woods, and it's like there's lots of times I've been in there where I felt nothing and have been perfectly safe, but at the same time, there's many times where I've just felt unease and off. And anyone who spends any length of time in the woods knows something is always watching you.
Yep. Yep. And it's not necessarily something supernatural. There is always something with its eyes on you when you're out and about. Yep, for sure.
So, and I think the Wendigo is a part of that, like that whole phenomena.
Yeah, that feeling to me, it's something we need to pay attention to as people. I think it's something that has been brushed under the rug so much, especially when you're kids, and you're told, oh, don't be silly, there's nothing there, and you hear that all the time too with people, and Jason, this, when you investigate a haunted house or something like that, and the people that moved in, first thing they always say is, I knew there was something off, and I just told myself, no, everything's good. And so much of the time it's like, you should have probably paid attention to that instinct. But we're one of the only animals in the world that I think ignores it. If we did that in the wild and we were a gazelle, we would have been eaten by a lion in the first 5 minutes.
Totally.
but here we are as humans, and just like to put it in a more, I guess, modern setting, it's even, I don't know, like as a woman, you're going down to your car park at night to get into your car, and maybe there's somebody in the elevator and you're like, oh, don't be silly, you're going to be rude if you don't get in the elevator. And there's something in your gut telling you, like, don't get in the elevator. And we ignore it. Like, all the time we ignore it. So I think there's some lessons to be learned here. What was your greatest takeaway, Jason, from all this?
Oh, I think it was just realizing how important the Wendigo mythos, for lack of a better word, is, I think, to Alberta, and how entrenched it is in the culture there. And just that to me just makes it even more real. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's something that people believe in so strongly. But at the same time, because I think back to what I wrote about Ogopogo, and how Ogopogo was a made up word, and how the Europeans had misappropriated this indigenous belief. I think because of how popular the Wendigo's become now, in terms of, like, it's been on Supernatural, and they've started making movies about it, and it's featured in video games like Until Dawn. There's probably maybe a risk of that happening to this story too. It hasn't happened yet because I don't think it's as widespread. But I think it's becoming that. And I think then a lot of people aren't going to know the truth behind where the story started, and how it started off as like this horrible crime. And people just think it's just this monster, which it's a lot more than that to me, and to the people who grew up with this story and who live in Alberta.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think it's one of those things that I think the heritage of the story is important to preserve. And I mean, it's bound to evolve like every story. I mean, there's bound to be various narrations of it and things like that. But I think at the end of the day, I think it comes down, at least for me, to understand where some of these tales and some of these people are coming from, and really being the student and listening to what they have to say, because there's so much wisdom with these elders and whatnot that have come forward and said, look, like, here's the skinny on this, like my friend Alisia, and so many of the people that I've spoken to over the years. And it's like, I know I'm a student of this universe. Like, I have no idea what's going on. Like,
same.
None of us do.
we have no clue.
We're all learning on the job here.
Yeah. All the time, every day.
Oh my God. Well, Jason, tell us about this amazing book, and because it is going to be coming out soon, and where people can find you, especially if they've had encounter or report that they can just not explain.
Yeah, that'd be great. I mean, the book is not due out until like next year, so the title is unknown, and things like that. But you can keep up with me. Like, I mean, I'm on Instagram at Jason Hewlett Official. I'm on Facebook. A Paranormal Team, the Canadian Paranormal Society, has its own website, CanadianParanormalSociety.ca, and then we have our own Facebook group. And just find me at any one of those platforms, and you can DM me if you've had a weird experience, or you believe your place is haunted or anything like that. I do my best to keep up with everyone who gets a hold of me. So please do, come find me.
Well, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for your input on this, and we look forward to your next journey out to Alberta, because there'll be one. And we just can't wait to have you back. So thank you so much.
Now streaming on Peacock.
By all that's holy, Bridget Jones.
Hello, old friend.
Bridget Jones is back.
We are about to embark on an adventure.
For one final chapter.
Anything else I can help with?
Yes.
Experience every moment.
Do you think about what might have been?
And fall in love.
To Bridget.
All over again.
It's time to live.
Bridget Jones, Mad About the Boy. Streaming now only on Peacock.
You know what's smart? Enjoying a fresh gourmet meal at home that you didn't have to cook. Meet Factor, your loophole in the laws of mealtime. Chef-crafted meals delivered with a tap, ready in just 2 minutes. You know what's even smarter? Treating yourself without cheating your goals. Factor is dietitian approved, chef prepared, and you plated. Pretty smart, huh? Refresh your routine and eat smart with Factor. Learn more at factormeals.com.
And we are so happy that Jason could join us. Oh my goodness gracious. It's always good talking to him. He's such a nice person.
He is. And he's just as nice in person.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, he's so full of information. And what I loved about this from him was that he really did come to this project as we do, which is as students to understand a phenomenon that's going on, because it's one of those subjects. It can be a bit of a touchy subject, and to have Alisia there to kind of teach us what this is all about on so many different levels, and then. Yeah. And then bringing in experiences and reports that we've had come in, ones that are current, to be able to look at this phenomenon from the parapsychology standpoint as well, has just been a really interesting, I think, well-rounded experience for everybody.
There's that whole question. It's kind of like Bigfoot in that way. Is it an actual flesh and blood creature? Is it a psychosis? Is it perhaps maybe something in between the two, and is an entity in and of itself? Well, what is a Wendigo? What exactly is this? And we're still trying to figure that out.
Yeah, I don't feel like I'm any closer to the answer.
No.
but at the same time, I've walked away from these experiences understanding that there is, to me, from my perspective, that there is 100% something going on that we have not come to a conclusion about. And I mean, and I come at a lot of these things from, I guess, not only the spiritual side, but also the academic side. And to me, there's so much weighted evidence here that there is something to understand, and that has just been breezed over, really, by people that I guess maybe want to brush under the rug as one thing or another. And I don't think we can come to that conclusion. Ignoring all this stuff is just, we're losing an opportunity to learn something, perhaps about ourselves. Oh, definitely. Well, and I mean, that's what this whole work is. It always comes back to the inner self. It always comes back to our own work. And that's the one thing I've learned. I mean, I spent most of my life in Alberta, spent some of it in Vancouver, but most of it in Alberta. And that was the one thing that you get a lot of. You get a lot of self-reflection time, because our winters are long and it's damn cold. We just came off a stint of about -40. It was minus 31 this morning. And so you get a lot of time of quiet to really look at where we are when we don't have a ton of stimulus around us. And I think this is one of those situations where we can kind of take a look at, okay, what do these stories mean for us now? What can we learn from them then? And we didn't even really touch on some of the Slave Lake stories or anything like that. So that might be a whole other episode. Totally. We'll have Jason back, perhaps, once the documentary and his book are more widely available. Yes, because I'm so excited for his book coming out. It's going to be great, you guys. I did the foreword for it. It's really cool, and he just brings again that sort of student mentality to what he's understanding and learning. The same mentality he brought to his book on Ogopogo. It's just understanding the spiritual side, and that we can sit and listen to the stories that are around us, that are embedded around us, and this is one of them. I just love doing this stuff. And, our guests are always so engaging and so fascinating. Really. Thank you, Jason, again, for coming on the show. And thank you to all of you for joining us on this eerie expedition, our dear listeners. And remember, there is no line between the natural and the supernatural. All is consciousness. Until next time, stay curious, friends. and keep the tallow hot.
Supernatural Circumstances is a co-production of Entity Seeker Paranormal Research and Teachings and Good Egg Studios. This podcast is part of the Curious Cast podcast network. Theme music by Corey Johnson of Catalyst Records in Edmonton, Alberta. You can learn more about Morgan Knudsen at entityseeker.ca and learn more about me, Mike Browne, and listen to my show, Dark Poutine, at darkpoutine.com. Feel free to email the show at supernaturalcircumstances@gmail.com.
Daniel Blanchard is no ordinary thief. His heists are ingenious. His escapes defy belief. And when he sees the dazzling diamond CC Star, he'll risk everything to steal it. His exploits set off an intercontinental manhunt. But how long can CC Star stay lucky for Daniel? I'm Seren Jones, and this is a most audacious heist. Listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your podcasts.